The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as General Marcus Thompson walked through the training grounds. His polished boots clicked against the concrete, each step echoing his 30 years of distinguished service. Today was supposed to be routine, just another inspection of the new recruits who had arrived from various specialized units across the country. Thompson had seen thousands of soldiers throughout his career. He could usually read their backgrounds within minutes of meeting them. The nervous rookies fidgeted with their equipment. The experienced veterans stood with quiet confidence. The troublemakers had a certain look in their eyes that gave them away immediately. But when he stopped in front of Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, something made him pause. She stood at perfect attention, her uniform crisp and properly fitted. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes looked straight ahead with unwavering focus. At first glance, she appeared to be just another competent soldier, among the dozens lined up for inspection. Then his eyes dropped to her chest, where various badges and ribbons decorated her uniform. Most soldiers her age, she couldn't be more than 25, would have the standard markings of basic training, maybe a few commendations for good conduct or physical fitness. But there, among the expected decorations, was something that made Thompson's breath catch in his throat. A sniper badge. Not just any sniper badge, but one marked with 3 200-meter, indicating a confirmed kill shot at over 2 miles distance. Thompson blinked and looked again, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. The badge was real, properly positioned, and bore the official seals that confirmed its authenticity. In his 3 decades of military service, Thompson had met perhaps 5 snipers capable of making such an extraordinary shot. Each of them had been legendary figures, soldiers whose names were spoken with reverence in military circles. Men who had spent years perfecting their craft under the most dangerous conditions imaginable, and here stood this young woman, looking for all the world like she had just graduated from basic training. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Thompson said, his voice carrying across the quiet training ground. The other soldiers remained at attention, but he could sense their curiosity about why the general had singled out their colleague. "Yes, sir," Elena responded, her voice clear and steady. Thompson stepped closer, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. Her hands, he noticed, were completely steady. Not even the slightest tremor that might indicate nervousness at being addressed by such a high-ranking officer. Her breathing was controlled and even. Most telling of all, her eyes never wavered from their forward focus, showing the kind of discipline that usually took years to develop. "That's quite an impressive badge you're wearing," Thompson said, gesturing toward the sniper decoration. "Care to tell me how you earned it?" For the first time since he had approached, Elena's eyes shifted to meet his gaze directly. In that moment, Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. Her eyes held something he had only seen in the most experienced combat veterans, a depth of experience that seemed impossible for someone her age. They were the eyes of someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. "Afghanistan, sir. 3 years ago. Taliban commander directing attacks on a refugee convoy," Elena replied without hesitation. Her voice remained steady, but Thompson caught something else, a weight to her words that suggested the memory was both crystal clear and deeply significant. Thompson nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had read reports of that particular operation. It had been a desperate situation. Hundreds of civilians trapped in a valley with Taliban forces closing in from multiple directions. The shot that had saved them was legendary among military snipers, discussed in training sessions as an example of extraordinary skill under impossible conditions. But the official reports had been classified, and the identity of the sniper had been kept secret for security reasons. "I see," Thompson said quietly. He glanced at the other soldiers in the line, then back at Elena. "And what brings you to my base, Sergeant?" "Reassignment, sir. I've been transferred to your reconnaissance unit." Thompson felt his eyebrows rise slightly. His reconnaissance unit was already considered one of the elite formations in the military. They handled sensitive missions that required the highest levels of skill and discretion. But if Elena Rodriguez was who he was beginning to suspect she was, her presence here meant something much more significant than a simple reassignment. He had heard whispers in recent months about a new type of operation being planned, something that would require soldiers with very specific and unusual skill sets, the kind of mission that normal military units weren't equipped to handle. If Elena was being assigned to his unit, It likely meant that whatever was coming would require the services of someone capable of making impossible shots under extreme pressure. "Welcome to the unit, Sergeant," Thompson said finally. "I have a feeling you're going to fit in quite well here." As he continued down the line of soldiers, Thompson's mind remained focused on Elena Rodriguez. 30 years in the military had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct he had was telling him that this young woman was far more than she appeared to be. The 3,200-meter badge wasn't just a decoration. It was a warning to anyone smart enough to understand its significance. Behind him, Elena remained at attention, but Thompson could feel her presence like a weight on his shoulders. She was calm, professional, and utterly competent. But there was something else there. Something that reminded him of the most dangerous people he had ever encountered in his military career. Not dangerous in a reckless way, but dangerous in the way that a perfectly crafted weapon was dangerous, quiet, efficient, and absolutely lethal when the situation required it. As Thompson completed his inspection and walked back toward the headquarters building, he made a mental note to review Elena's complete service record. Something told him that her official file would make for very interesting reading, and that her presence at his base was the beginning of something much larger than a routine personnel transfer. 3 hours after the inspection, General Thompson sat behind his desk with Elena Rodriguez's service file spread before him. What he read made him lean back in his chair and whistle softly under his breath. The file was thick, unusually thick for someone who had only been in the military for 6 years. Elena Rodriguez had been born in a small town in Texas, the daughter of a retired Marine Corps drill instructor. She had grown up hunting with her father, showing an early aptitude for marksmanship that had impressed even seasoned military veterans. At 18, she had enlisted with test scores that placed her in the top 1% of all recruits. But it was what happened after basic training that truly caught Thompson's attention. Instead of being assigned to a regular unit, Elena had been fast-tracked into sniper school, unusual for someone so young and inexperienced. Her instructor's comments were consistent. Exceptional natural ability, learns at an extraordinary rate, shows maturity beyond her years. She had graduated first in her class, setting several academy records in the process. Her longest confirmed training shot had been 2,100 meters, already beyond what most snipers achieved in their entire careers. Then came her first deployment to Afghanistan, where she had been attached to an elite reconnaissance unit operating in some of the most dangerous territory in the country. Thompson turned the page and found himself reading mission reports that made his blood run cold. Elena's unit had been involved in operations that were barely mentioned in official records, the kind of black ops missions that the military preferred to keep quiet. She had provided overwatch for hostage rescues, eliminated high-value targets in urban environments, and provided critical intelligence from positions deep behind enemy lines. The report about the 3,200-meter shot was there, though heavily redacted. What Thompson could read painted a picture of an impossible situation. A Taliban commander had positioned himself on a mountainside overlooking a valley where nearly 400 refugees were trapped. The weather conditions were terrible, high winds, shifting light, and extreme elevation changes that made long-range shooting nearly impossible. Multiple attempts had been made to reach the commander's position, but Taliban fighters had created a defensive perimeter that made direct assault too costly. The refugees were running out of time. Enemy reinforcements were moving in, and within hours, hundreds of innocent people would be slaughtered. Elena had been positioned on a ridge almost 2 miles away from the target. The shot required her to account for wind speed, bullet drop, atmospheric pressure, and the rotation of the Earth itself. Most snipers wouldn't even attempt such a shot under perfect conditions, let alone in the middle of a combat zone with lives hanging in the balance. According to the report, Elena had taken nearly an hour to prepare for the shot. She had studied weather patterns, calculated trajectories, and waited for the precise moment when all conditions aligned. When she finally pulled the trigger, the bullet had traveled for nearly 8 seconds before finding its target. The Taliban commander had been eliminated with a single shot, and the refugee convoy had escaped to safety. Thompson closed the file and stared out his office window. In the distance, he could see Elena on the training range with some of the other soldiers. Even from this distance, he could tell she was teaching them something, probably advanced shooting techniques based on the way they were positioned. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell entered and saluted. Mitchell was Thompson's intelligence officer, a sharp woman who had a talent for understanding the bigger picture when pieces of information didn't seem to fit together. "Sir, I've been reviewing the personnel files for our new transfers," Mitchell said. "There's something you need to know about Sergeant Rodriguez." Thompson gestured for her to continue. Her transfer here wasn't routine. It came directly from Pentagon Command, with instructions that she be integrated into our unit immediately. No explanation, no background briefing, just orders to make her part of our operational roster. Any idea why? Mitchell placed a thin folder on Thompson's desk. "I made some calls to contacts at other bases. Rodriguez isn't the only highly skilled sniper being quietly reassigned right now. At least 12 others with similar specialties have been moved to different units across the country over the past month." Thompson opened the folder and found photographs and brief profiles of other soldiers. Each one had extraordinary qualifications: urban warfare specialists, long-range reconnaissance experts, soldiers with experience in the most difficult and dangerous missions the military had undertaken in recent years. "This looks like they're assembling something," Thompson said quietly. "That's what I think too, sir. And based on the skill sets involved, it's not going to be anything routine." Through his window, Thompson watched Elena demonstrate a shooting position to another soldier. Her movements were precise and economical, showing the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice under real-world conditions. She wasn't just teaching technique, she was passing on knowledge gained through actual combat experience. "Have you had a chance to speak with her directly?" Mitchell asked. "Not beyond the initial inspection. But I plan to. If we're going to be working together, I need to understand what we're dealing with. From what I've heard, she's extremely professional, keeps to herself, follows orders without question. But there's something about her that makes even experienced soldiers nervous." Thompson nodded. He had sensed that too. The way other soldiers seemed to give Elena extra space, the respectful distance they maintained even during casual interactions. It wasn't fear exactly, but recognition that they were in the presence of someone operating on a different level. "Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning," Thompson said. "I want to talk with her privately, get a better sense of what she brings to the unit." As Mitchell left, Thompson returned his attention to Elena's file. The more he read, the more convinced he became that her arrival was connected to something much larger than routine personnel shuffling. In his experience, when the Pentagon started quietly moving assets around without explanation, it usually meant someone was planning for a situation that hadn't been made public yet. Elena Rodriguez was clearly one of those assets, a soldier with skills so specialized and experience so unique that she could only be deployed for very specific types of missions. Whatever was coming, Thompson had a feeling it would require exactly the kind of impossible shot that had made Elena famous among those who knew about such things. The question was whether he and his unit would be ready when the time came to find out what that mission would be. The next morning, Elena knocked on General Thompson's office door exactly at 800 hours. When she entered, Thompson was struck again by her quiet presence. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible when necessary. "Sergeant Rodriguez, please have a seat," Thompson said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. As she sat down, he noticed she chose a position that gave her a clear view of both the door and the window, the kind of automatic awareness that came from spending time in hostile territory. "I've been reviewing your service record," Thompson began. "It makes for impressive reading." Elena remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Thompson appreciated that. No false modesty, no unnecessary explanations. Just professional attention to what he had to say. The shot in Afghanistan, the 3 200-meter elimination. "I've read the report, but I'd like to hear it from your perspective." For a moment, Elena's expression didn't change. Then she leaned forward slightly, and Thompson could see her organizing her thoughts before speaking. "The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly," she said. "The refugees had been trapped for 18 hours. Intelligence indicated that Taliban reinforcements would arrive within 6 hours. And once they did, there would be no way to extract the civilians safely." Thompson nodded, encouraging her to continue. The target was positioned on an elevated ridge with clear sight lines over the entire valley. He was directing mortar and small arms fire from multiple positions, making any ground assault extremely costly. Air support was unavailable due to weather conditions and the proximity of civilians. Elena paused, and Thompson could see her reliving the moment in her mind. I was positioned approximately 3,180 meters from the target, accounting for elevation differences. Wind conditions were variable, gusting from different directions at different altitudes. Temperature gradients were creating air density variations that would affect bullet trajectory. Thompson had done enough long-range shooting to understand the complexity of what she was describing. Each factor she mentioned would require precise calculation, and any error in judgment would mean missing the target entirely. The shot window was extremely narrow, Elena continued. The target was only exposed for brief periods when he moved between covered positions. I had to time the shot not just for when he was visible, but for when atmospheric conditions would give the bullet the best chance of reaching him accurately. How long did you observe before taking the shot? 57 minutes. I tracked wind patterns, noted the target's movement routine, and calculated bullet flight time against his exposure windows. When I finally fired, I had approximately a 4-second window where the target would be in the precise position needed for the bullet to arrive. Thompson felt a chill at the casual way she described what amounted to one of the most difficult shots in military history. The level of patience, calculation, and skill required was beyond what most people could comprehend. What happened after the shot? The target was eliminated. Taliban positions lost coordination immediately. Our ground units were able to establish a secure corridor for civilian evacuation within 2 hours. Elena delivered this information with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to describe routine training exercises, but Thompson could see something else in her eyes. A weight that suggested she understood the full implications of what she had done. Hundreds of lives had depended on her ability to make an impossible shot under extreme pressure. How do you handle that kind of responsibility? Thompson asked. For the first time, Elena hesitated before answering. The mission comes first. Personal feelings about what I'm asked to do aren't relevant to completing the objective. It was a professional answer, but Thompson sensed there was more beneath the surface. He had seen how that kind of pressure affected different soldiers. Some became hardened and distant. Others burned out quickly. A few, like Elena, seemed to develop an almost supernatural focus that allowed them to function at levels others couldn't sustain. I understand you've been assigned to our reconnaissance unit, Thompson said, changing direction slightly. Are you familiar with the type of operations we typically conduct? I've read the available briefings: long-range surveillance, target identification, and precision elimination when required. High-value targets in difficult terrain, often with limited support. Thompson nodded. That's correct. But I have a feeling your presence here indicates we may be moving into territory that's even more challenging than our usual operations. Elena's expression remained neutral, but Thompson caught a slight shift in her posture, just the kind of subtle alertness that suggested she was picking up on implications beyond what he was saying directly. I'm prepared for whatever mission requirements arise, she said simply. Over the next hour, Thompson continued the conversation, asking about Elena's training, her experience working with different types of units, and her assessment of various tactical scenarios. What emerged was a picture of a soldier who had not only mastered the technical aspects of her specialty but had developed an almost intuitive understanding of complex battlefield situations. She could analyze terrain features and predict how they would affect both her own positioning and enemy movement patterns. She understood weather systems well enough to forecast how conditions would change over the course of a long mission. Most importantly, she had learned to remain calm and focused even when everything around her was falling apart. As the meeting concluded, Thompson felt confident that Elena Rodriguez was exactly what she appeared to be. An extraordinary soldier whose skills had been tested under the most demanding conditions possible. But he also sensed that there were aspects of her experience she hadn't shared, depths of knowledge that could only come from operations that never appeared in official reports. One final question, Thompson said as Elena prepared to leave. In your assessment, what type of mission would require someone with your specific skill set to be assigned to a unit like ours? Elena paused at the door and turned back. For just a moment, Thompson saw something in her expression that looked almost like concern. Something that can't be solved through conventional military operations, she said. Something that requires precision and patience under conditions where failure isn't an option. After she left, Thompson sat back in his chair and considered her words. In his experience, that description could apply to only a very limited number of scenarios, all of them involving situations that the military preferred to handle quietly, with minimal public attention and maximum effectiveness. Whatever was coming, Thompson was beginning to understand that Elena Rodriguez hadn't been assigned to his unit by accident. She was there because someone had determined that the missions ahead would require exactly the kind of impossible skills she had demonstrated on that mountainside in Afghanistan. 2 weeks after Elena's arrival, General Thompson received the call he had been expecting. The voice on the secure line belonged to Colonel James Harrison from Pentagon Special Operations Command. "Thompson, we need to discuss your new personnel assignment," Harrison said without preamble. "Sergeant Rodriguez specifically." "I'm listening. How much do you know about Operation Silent Thunder?" Thompson frowned. The name wasn't familiar, which was unusual given his security clearance level. "Nothing. Should I? Classified above your current level, but that's about to change. We need your unit for a mission that's been in planning stages for 8 months. Rodriguez was assigned to you because we're going to need her particular expertise." The line went quiet for a moment, and Thompson could hear the sound of papers being shuffled on the other end. "There's a briefing tomorrow at 1400 hours. Classified Facility Building 7 at Andrews. Bring Rodriguez. You'll understand everything then." The line went dead, leaving Thompson staring at his phone. In 30 years of military service, he had learned to read between the lines of such conversations. When Pentagon Command started using phrases like particular expertise in scheduling briefings at classified facilities, it meant the situation was both urgent and complicated. The next day, Thompson and Elena drove to Andrews Air Force Base in silence. Elena had received the news of the briefing with her typical calm professionalism, asking no questions and showing no visible curiosity about what they might be walking into. Building 7 was an unremarkable, concrete structure surrounded by security checkpoints and guards who examined their credentials with unusual thoroughness. Inside, they were escorted through a series of corridors to a windowless conference room where several other officers were already waiting. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room next to a large screen, displaying a satellite image of what appeared to be a mountainous region. Thompson recognized some of the other attendees, specialists from various elite units, intelligence officers, and technical experts whose presence suggested this operation would require a wide range of specialized skills. "Gentlemen, Sergeant Rodriguez," Harrison began, "what I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. The information in this room does not leave this room under any circumstances." He clicked a remote, and the satellite image zoomed in to show a compound built into the side of a mountain. The architecture was unusual, a combination of modern construction and natural cave systems that created a facility that would be nearly impossible to assault using conventional methods. 6 months ago, our intelligence networks identified this location as the operational headquarters for a terrorist organization that has been responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 different countries. The leader of this organization is a man named Rashid al-Mansouri. Harrison clicked again, and a photograph appeared showing a man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. Al-Mansouri is not your typical terrorist. He has advanced degrees in engineering and military strategy, and he spent the past 5 years building an organization that operates more like a corporation than a traditional terrorist cell. His people are disciplined, well-funded, and extremely difficult to infiltrate. Thompson studied the compound image. The facility was built into terrain that would make any kind of direct assault nearly suicidal. The approaches were covered by overlapping fields of fire, and the elevation changes would make it impossible to bring heavy weapons close enough to be effective. Intelligence indicates that al-Mansouri is planning something significant, Harrison continued. We don't know exactly what, but communications intercepts suggest it will happen within the next month and involve targets in at least 3 major cities. The colonel paused and looked directly at Elena. The problem is that al-Mansouri has learned from the mistakes of other terrorist leaders. He never leaves the compound, never communicates through channels we can intercept directly, and has surrounded himself with security measures that make conventional elimination methods impossible. Harrison clicked the remote again, and the image shifted to show a detailed topographical map of the area around the compound. However, Our analysts have identified one vulnerability. Twice each week, Al-Mansuri appears on a balcony overlooking the valley below. The exposure lasts for approximately 90 seconds, while he conducts what appears to be a personal ritual or prayer. During these moments, he is visible to observation from this ridge. A red dot appeared on the map, indicating a position that Thompson estimated to be at least 3 miles from the compound. The distance from the optimal shooting position to the target is 4,100 meters. Weather conditions in the region are consistently challenging. High winds, rapid temperature changes, and atmospheric pressure variations that make long-range shooting extremely difficult. Thompson felt his breath catch. He understood now why Elena had been assigned to his unit. The shot Harrison was describing was beyond anything in standard military doctrine. It would require not just exceptional skill, but the kind of near-supernatural precision that only a handful of people in the world possessed. Traditional assault options have been ruled out as too risky, Harrison continued. The terrain favors defenders, casualties would be unacceptable, and the likelihood of Al-Mansuri escaping through underground tunnels is too high. Airstrikes are not feasible due to the cave system and the presence of civilians in nearby villages. Elena had remained silent throughout the briefing, but Thompson could see her studying the maps and satellite images with intense concentration. She was already analyzing the tactical challenges, calculating variables, and assessing the feasibility of what was being proposed. The mission timeline is tight, Harrison said. Intelligence suggests Al-Mansuri's operation will launch in 3 weeks. We have one opportunity to eliminate him before that happens. The next scheduled balcony appearance is in 6 days. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a race against time to prevent something that could result in massive civilian casualties. Sergeant Rodriguez, Harrison said, addressing Elena directly for the first time. Based on your analysis of the tactical situation, is this shot achievable? Elena stood and moved to the map display. She studied the terrain features, elevation markers, and distance calculations for several minutes before responding. The shot is at the extreme edge of what's technically possible, she said quietly. Success would depend on perfect weather conditions, flawless equipment performance, and precise intelligence about the target's exact position and timing. She paused, continuing to examine the display. However, given the stakes involved and the lack of viable alternatives, I believe it can be done. Thompson felt a chill at the calm confidence in her voice. Elena wasn't just accepting the mission. She was already beginning to plan how to execute what most people would consider impossible. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, support requirements, and contingency plans, but Thompson's attention kept returning to Elena, watching as she absorbed every detail and began the mental process of preparing for a shot that would test the absolute limits of human capability under conditions where failure could cost thousands of lives. When they finally left the building, Thompson realized that everything had changed. His unit was no longer conducting routine reconnaissance operations. They were about to attempt something that would either save countless lives or serve as a stark reminder of the limitations of human skill when confronted with impossible odds. The insertion team moved through the mountainous terrain under cover of darkness, their progress slow and methodical. Elena carried her custom rifle system, a specialized weapon that had been modified specifically for extreme long-range operations. Every component had been tested and calibrated to ensure maximum accuracy under the challenging conditions they would face. General Thompson accompanied the team, knowing that his presence wasn't strictly necessary, but unable to stay behind while his soldiers undertook such a dangerous mission. The 12-person unit included Elena, communications specialists, security personnel, and a meteorologist whose job was to provide real-time weather analysis for the critical shot. They had been moving for 6 hours when they reached the designated observation position. The ridge offered a clear line of sight to the target compound, but it also left them exposed to detection if Al-Mansuri's security forces conducted routine patrols of the surrounding area. Elena immediately began setting up her shooting position, choosing a location that provided both the stability she would need and natural camouflage to hide the team's presence. Thompson watched as she methodically checked every piece of equipment, testing communications gear and verifying that her rifle's scope was properly calibrated. Distance to target is 4,127 meters. reported Sergeant Mike Chen, the team's range specialist. Elevation difference is 847 meters, with the target position higher than our current location. Elena nodded, making notes in a small waterproof notebook. Over the next hour, she would record dozens of measurements and calculations, building a comprehensive picture of all the factors that would affect her shot. The meteorologist, Captain Sarah Williams, set up weather monitoring equipment that would track wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes. Current conditions show variable winds between 15 and 25 kilometers per hour, she reported. Wind direction is shifting approximately every 12 minutes, consistent with the thermal patterns we expected for this terrain. Thompson found himself fascinated by the level of detail required for Elena's preparation. She wasn't just aiming at a target, she was conducting a complex engineering calculation that had to account for the rotation of the Earth, atmospheric pressure changes, temperature variations, and the ballistic characteristics of a bullet traveling over 2.5 miles. The bullet will be in flight for approximately 11 seconds, Elena explained to Thompson as she worked. During that time, the target will potentially move several meters just from normal breathing and small movements. I have to predict not just where he is when I fire, but where he will be when the bullet arrives. As dawn approached, the team received confirmation that Al-Mansouri was maintaining his usual schedule. Intelligence assets confirmed that he would appear on the balcony at approximately 06:30 hours local time for his regular 90-second ritual. Elena spent the pre-dawn hours in a state of intense concentration, reviewing calculations and mentally rehearsing the shot sequence. Thompson had seen many soldiers prepare for difficult missions, but there was something different about Elena's approach. She seemed to enter an almost meditative state, shutting out everything except the variables that would determine success or failure. At 06:15 hours, Captain Williams provided the final weather update. Wind conditions are stabilizing. Current readings show consistent 15-kilometer-per-hour winds from the southwest. Atmospheric pressure is steady, and visibility is excellent. Elena made final adjustments to her rifle scope and settled into her shooting position. The rifle was supported by a bipod and sandbags that would eliminate any movement during the critical moment of firing. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm that would minimize any disturbance to her aim. Target compound in sight, reported Chen, who was observing through high-powered binoculars. No visible activity on the balcony yet. Thompson checked his watch. 06:28 hours. In less than 2 minutes, Al-Mansouri would either appear as intelligence predicted, or the entire mission would be scrubbed. The next opportunity wouldn't come for another 3 days, potentially too late to prevent whatever operation the terrorist leader was planning. Movement on the balcony, Chen announced quietly. Single figure emerging from the interior door. Elena's breathing became even more controlled. Thompson could see her finger resting lightly on the trigger, ready but not yet committed to firing. Everything now depended on Al-Mansouri following his established pattern. Confirmed target identification, Chen said. Al-Mansouri is in position at the center of the balcony. Beginning his ritual sequence, Elena began her final calculations, adjusting for the exact position of the target and the current wind conditions. The shot would require her to aim several meters to the left and above the target to compensate for wind drift and bullet drop over the extreme. Distance, wind holding steady at 15 kilometers per hour, Williams reported. No significant changes in atmospheric conditions. Elena's world had narrowed to include only the crosshairs of her scope, the feel of the trigger against her finger, and the complex calculations that would guide the bullet to its target. She had done everything possible to prepare for this moment. Now it came down to the fundamental skills that had made her legendary among military snipers. Target is stationary, Chen announced. Optimal shooting window beginning now. Elena's breathing stopped entirely as she entered the final phase of her shot sequence. Her finger began the slow, steady pressure against the trigger that would fire the round. Every muscle in her body was perfectly controlled. Every calculation verified and ready. Thompson held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine not just the success of their mission, but potentially the safety of thousands of innocent people in cities around the world. Elena had demonstrated her extraordinary abilities before, but this shot was beyond anything she had ever attempted. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the mountainous terrain. Elena remained perfectly still, maintaining her shooting position as the bullet began its 11-second journey toward the target. There was nothing more any of them could do now except wait and hope that her calculations had been accurate. Through his binoculars, Chen tracked the distant compound, waiting to see the result of what might be the most difficult shot ever attempted in military history. The seconds stretched endlessly as everyone on the team waited to learn whether Elena Rodriguez had once again achieved the impossible, or whether they would have to find another way to stop al-Mansuri before his planned operation could be launched. Impact, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and relief. Target down. Mission successful. Elena finally relaxed her shooting position, but her expression remained focused and professional. She had done what she was trained to do, executing a shot that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. But for her, it was simply another successful completion of an assigned mission, regardless of how impossible it might have seemed to anyone else. The extraction from the mountain ridge went smoothly, but the real test of the mission's success would come in the hours and days that followed. As the team made their way back to the extraction point, intelligence networks around the world began monitoring communications intercepts and surveillance feeds to assess the impact of al-Mansuri's elimination. General Thompson walked alongside Elena during the descent, still processing what he had witnessed. The shot itself had been extraordinary enough, but it was Elena's reaction afterward that truly impressed him. She had shown no celebration, no visible relief, just the quiet professionalism of someone who had completed a difficult task successfully. Her focus had immediately shifted to ensuring the team's safe withdrawal from the area. "How do you do it?" Thompson asked during a brief rest stop. "How do you maintain that level of concentration under such extreme pressure?" Elena considered the question while checking her equipment. "Training becomes instinct," she said finally. "When you've practiced the fundamentals thousands of times, your body knows what to do even when your mind is dealing with the complexity of the situation." Thompson nodded, but he sensed there was more to it than that. Elena possessed something that couldn't be taught through training alone, an almost supernatural ability to remain calm and focused when everything around her was chaotic and uncertain. Back at the base, the team underwent extensive debriefing sessions. Intelligence analysts wanted to understand every detail of the operation, not just to confirm its success, but to learn from Elena's techniques for future missions. The shot she had made was already being studied by military experts who were trying to understand how such accuracy was possible under real-world conditions. Colonel Harrison arrived from Washington 3 days later, carrying confirmation that the mission had achieved its strategic objectives. Al-Mansuri's organization had collapsed immediately after his death, with various cells going into hiding and planned operations being abandoned. Intelligence agencies had intercepted communications, indicating that several major attacks had been called off due to the loss of leadership and coordination. "The preliminary intelligence suggests we prevented attacks that could have killed thousands of people," Harrison told Thompson during a private briefing. "The president has been personally informed about the mission's success, and there will be recognition for everyone involved." Thompson found Elena on the training range that afternoon, working with some of the unit's newer soldiers on basic marksmanship techniques. She was patient and methodical in her instruction, breaking down complex shooting principles into simple steps that the trainees could understand and practice. "The colonel says there will be official recognition for the mission," Thompson told her when the training session ended. Elena's response was characteristically understated. The mission was successful. That's what matters. Thompson studied her expression, trying to understand the person behind the extraordinary soldier. "Doesn't it affect you at all, knowing that you've potentially saved thousands of lives?" For a moment, Elena's professional composure seemed to soften slightly. "Every mission affects me," she said quietly. "But I learned early in my career that if you think too much about the weight of what you're doing, it becomes impossible to do it well. I focus on the technical aspects, the calculations, the wind readings, the equipment. The larger implications are someone else's responsibility." Over the following weeks, Thompson began to understand that Elena's approach to her work was both her greatest strength and a form of self-protection. The level of precision required for her missions demanded complete mental focus, leaving no room for emotional considerations that might interfere with technical execution. But he also recognized that carrying such responsibility took a toll that wasn't immediately visible. Elena was invariably polite and professional with her colleagues, but she maintained a distance that suggested she had learned to compartmentalize aspects of her experience that others might not understand. The official recognition ceremony took place a month later in a classified setting, with only a small number of attendees. Elena received a medal that couldn't be worn publicly, and a commendation that would never appear in her official service record. For security reasons, the details of her achievement would remain classified indefinitely. Thompson watched as Elena accepted the recognition with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else. She understood that the secrecy was necessary, that public knowledge of such operations could compromise future missions and endanger other soldiers, but he wondered if she ever wished for acknowledgement that reflected the true magnitude of what she had accomplished. After the ceremony, Thompson found himself thinking about the broader implications of soldiers like Elena Rodriguez. The military had always depended on individuals willing to take on extraordinary responsibilities, but Elena represented something different, a level of skill and dedication that pushed the boundaries of what most people thought possible. Her presence in his unit had changed the way Thompson thought about military capability. With Elena available for missions requiring extreme precision, strategic options became available that simply hadn't existed before. The successful elimination of al-Mansouri had demonstrated that even the most protected and dangerous targets could be reached if the right soldier was available for the mission, but Thompson also recognized the ethical complexities involved in depending on individuals with such specialized capabilities. Elena's skills made certain missions possible, but they also created expectations and pressures that few people could sustain over long periods. The military would need to think carefully about how to support soldiers like Elena, while ensuring that their unique abilities were used responsibly. As he watched Elena return to her regular duties, Thompson felt a mixture of admiration and concern. She had proven herself capable of achieving things that seemed impossible, but he wondered what long-term price she might pay for carrying such extraordinary responsibilities. The 3,200-meter badge on her uniform represented not just exceptional skill, but a burden that few people could understand or share. The successful mission against him, al-Mansouri, had established Elena's reputation among military leadership as someone who could be counted on for the most difficult and important operations. Thompson suspected that this was just the beginning of a career that would involve challenges and responsibilities that most soldiers never faced. Elena Rodriguez had demonstrated that with the right combination of skill, training, and dedication, even the most impossible missions could be accomplished. But Thompson also understood that such capabilities came with costs that extended far beyond what appeared in official records or medal ceremonies. The real question was whether the military system could provide the support and understanding that soldiers like Elena would need to sustain their effectiveness over time. 6 months after the al-Mansouri mission, General Thompson received word that Elena Rodriguez was being transferred again. This time, the orders came from the highest levels of military command, with instructions that were even more classified than her previous assignment. Thompson found Elena in the unit's equipment room, carefully cleaning and maintaining her rifle system. It was something she did every day, regardless of whether she had been training or not. The meticulous care she showed for her equipment reflected the same attention to detail that made her extraordinary shots possible. "I hear you're moving on," Thompson said, sitting down across from her. Elena continued her work without looking up. "Yes, sir. New assignment came through this morning. Can you tell me where you're going?" "Special Activities Division. Beyond that, I don't have many details yet," Thompson nodded. The Special Activities Division was legendary within military circles, a unit that handled operations so sensitive that most people weren't even supposed to know it existed. If Elena was being assigned there, it meant her unique skills were needed for missions that went beyond conventional military operations. "How do you feel about leaving?" Thompson asked. Elena finally looked up from her rifle. "This unit has been good to work with. Professional soldiers, clear mission objectives, good support structure. But wherever I'm needed most is where I should be." It was a typical Elena response, focused on duty rather than personal preferences, practical rather than emotional. But Thompson had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated her true feelings about situations. "You've made a significant impact here," Thompson said. not just through the missions you've completed, but in how you've worked with the other soldiers. They've learned things from you that they couldn't get anywhere else. Elena resumed her equipment maintenance. Good soldiers learn from each other. That's how units improve. Thompson knew he would miss having Elena in his command. Over the months she had been with his unit, she had become more than just an exceptional sniper. Her presence had elevated the performance of everyone around her, not through flashy demonstrations of skill, but through the quiet example of someone who approached every task with complete professionalism. The Al-Mansuri mission, Thompson said. Intelligence analysts are still studying the technical details of that shot. They're saying it represents a new standard for what's possible in long-range precision operations. The mission was successful because everyone did their job correctly, Elena replied. The shot was just one component of a larger operation that required multiple specialists working together. Thompson smiled at her characteristic deflection of individual credit. But he had been present for the mission, and he knew that Elena's shot had been the critical factor that made everything else possible. Without her unique combination of skill, experience, and mental discipline, the operation would have failed. The next morning, Elena packed her personal belongings, a surprisingly small collection of items that fit easily into a single duffel bag. Thompson had noticed that she accumulated very few possessions, keeping only what was essential for her work and basic personal needs. As Elena prepared to leave, other members of the unit gathered to say goodbye. The respect they showed her was evident in their formal but genuine farewells. She had earned their admiration not through boasting about her achievements, but through consistent demonstration of competence and reliability. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Thompson's intelligence officer, pulled him aside as Elena finished her preparations. "I've been hearing rumors about where she's going," Mitchell said quietly. "The Special Activities Division is apparently putting together a team for operations that are even more sensitive than what we've been doing. Multiple countries are involved, and the targets are individuals who pose threats that go beyond normal military or law enforcement capabilities." Thompson nodded. It made sense that Elena would be recruited for such work. Her skills were rare enough that she could only be deployed for missions where conventional approaches had already been ruled out as ineffective. "Do you think she's ready for that level of responsibility?" Mitchell asked. Thompson considered the question while watching Elena double-check her equipment one final time. Over the months he had observed her, Elena had consistently demonstrated not just technical skill, but the mental resilience needed to handle extreme pressure and complex moral situations. "She's as ready as anyone could be," Thompson said finally. "But I worry about what happens to people who spend their careers taking on missions that others can't handle. There's only so much weight any individual can carry." When Elena was ready to leave, Thompson walked with her to the vehicle that would transport her to the airfield. The morning was clear and cool, with the kind of perfect visibility that Elena always preferred for long-range shooting. "Thank you for the opportunity to work with your unit," Elena said as they reached the vehicle. "It's been a good assignment." "Thank you for what you've brought to us," Thompson replied. "You've made us all better soldiers." Elena shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who had learned to convey confidence and respect through simple gestures. Then she loaded her equipment into the vehicle and settled into the passenger seat. As the vehicle drove away, Thompson found himself thinking about the broader implications of Elena's career. The military had always depended on individuals willing to accept extraordinary responsibilities. But soldiers like Elena represented something new, specialists whose unique capabilities enabled operations that would otherwise be impossible. The success of the Al-Mansuri mission had demonstrated the strategic value of having access to such specialized skills, but it had also raised questions about how to support and sustain individuals who carried such unique burdens. Elena's transfer to even more sensitive operations suggested that the demands on her would only increase over time. Thompson returned to his office and found Elena's service record still open on his desk. The file had grown thicker during her time with his unit, filled with mission reports and performance evaluations that documented her exceptional contributions. But he knew that the most important aspects of Elena's service would never appear in any official record. The 200-meter sniper badge that had first caught Thompson's attention was just one symbol of Elena's extraordinary capabilities. Her real achievement was in demonstrating that with the right combination of skill, training, and dedication, even the most impossible missions could be completed successfully. As Thompson closed Elena's file and locked it away, he reflected on the privilege of having worked with someone whose abilities pushed the boundaries of what most people thought possible. Elena Rodriguez had shown that individual excellence could make a decisive difference in situations where conventional approaches failed. But Thompson also understood that soldiers like Elena were rare, and that the military needed to think carefully about how to identify, train, and support individuals capable of such extraordinary service. The challenges facing the world were becoming increasingly complex, and meeting them would require people willing to accept responsibilities that most others couldn't even comprehend. Elena's transfer to new missions meant that her unique skills would continue to serve purposes that remained classified and unrecognized by the public. But Thompson knew that somewhere in the world, there would be situations where her presence would make the difference between success and failure, between safety and catastrophe. That knowledge was both reassuring and sobering, a reminder of how much could depend on the capabilities of a single exceptional soldier.